I welcome all here at our session. We'll try to discuss quite important for all of us issues. We all have a heart, and it would be great to have it healthy for as long as possible. And how to keep our heart healthy for as long as possible, what kind of measures can we undertake, and what does science allow us to do for that purpose. We'll talk about our speakers. So Irina Chazova, our Deputy Director on the Expert and Scientific Work of the National Medical Cardiological Center. Our guest from the US, Marie Johnson, General Director of Cardiovascular, Professor of Biomedicine and Engineering in Minnesota University. Philip Kopelov, Professor of Chair of Cardiology, Functional and Ultrasound Diagnostics, Director of Institute of Personalized Medicine, Sechenov University. Alexey Utin, Chief Doctor of Smart Checkup, Head of Non-Invasive Cardiovascularization of blood flow organs, and my colleague and blogger. And my name is Alexey Vodovozov, doctor, scientific journalist. So we'll start that I'll give each speaker opportunity to talk about myths. Because as you know, in any medical topic, there are always a lot of myths and misconceptions, and most of them are quite dangerous. Not just there is a myth. They can bear some danger. So let's talk about it. Irina, you know, it's hard to say. As for cardiovascular diseases, we don't have any myths, at least in my areas. So statistics of cardiovascular mortality rate. Everyone knows in Russia it's terrible, and now the death rate, mortality rate of cardiovascular diseases, so 570 people for 100,000 people. So it's not a myth, but reality is that we all know that men are weak sex here. So according to the American data about Russian statistics, so 575 cases for 100,000 people, men amount to 956 cases for 100,000. So women are much more seldom. So among women, last year it was 393 cases of women for 100,000 people. It's always good to compare with what happen in other countries. I'd like to cite you an example of healthcare program, national project. So our target is to have mortality rate 450 cases per 100,000 people. So there is a myth that it's very good and it's a great merit. I'd like to say that even these low numbers are still much higher than what we can see abroad. Let's start with the US. Men last year died 236 cases per 100,000. Women, even lower, 117 cases. So I'd like to quote such countries as France, for instance. In France, it's the minimum mortality rate, 106 for men and 38 for women per 100,000. So it's what's called the French paradox. Let's talk about Israel. It's also a very important country. We love this country. A lot of our former compatriots live there. So in Israel, so 100 men per 100,000 people, and for women 42. What about Scandinavian countries? They're close to us. Let's talk about Finland. 217 men and 68 women. By the way, I think we will discuss it. In Finland there was a very great preventive program and mortality rate decreased a lot. In Russia, mortality rate among men is at 11 rate, worse than us, only some former USSR republics. So the myth is an underestimation of the significance of this problem, and underestimation of the significance of this problem in Russia, because in civilized world it's much lower.
There we go. Thank you for having me. So I'm coming at this from a couple different angles. The first is that they mentioned before that I'm the CEO of a startup company that is dedicated to the development of a non-invasive diagnostic device for early detection of coronary artery disease. Some of the things that surprised me over time were, first of all, we all believe that if defibrillators are available, that you'll be saved, right? But the issue is that you only have about a 30% chance of living if you have a heart attack outside of a hospital. If you're by yourself, it's about 12%. If you have something called blockage in your widowmaker coronary vessel, you have about a 6% chance of living. So I think we walk around believing that if there's a defibrillator available that we're going to live, and that's not necessarily true. Another thing that's really surprising is that most people believe that if you're treated for high cholesterol, that's going to solve your problem, right? But in a postmortem study conducted out of California, they took a look at patients who had died from a sudden cardiac event, and only 3 out of 10 of those patients had elevated cholesterol. Another thing is that we believe that blockage associated with high cholesterol is the primary cause of death, but it's really not. It's something called a vulnerable plaque that ruptures that will cause a heart attack. I was widowed about 20 years ago. My husband was 41 years old. He was 6'1". Apologies, I have to use the English units. He weighed about 180 pounds. He was asymptomatic as far as we knew. I had a 4-year-old and a 7-week-old baby at the time, and you could have written a million things that would happen to me next in my life. My husband dying suddenly was not one of them. Early detection in asymptomatic patients is against all of the Heart Association and preventative medicine guidelines. In the United States, the U.S. Preventative Task Force says that testing asymptomatic low-risk patients hurts more than helps, because there are associated follow-up tests that can expose patients to radiation, and they can perform interventions that are really not necessary. In patients that are intermediate risk and asymptomatic, the evidence-based clinical publications say that the benefit is inconclusive. And so large-scale prospective randomized studies are not available to tell us that intervening early in asymptomatic low risk or even intermediate risk patients is appropriate. And so as the public, I think it's of concern, because we really believe that if we're alerted early, that it can save our lives, and that's not necessarily true. Mm-hmm. So right now in medicine, I believe that we are in the wild, wild west. And what I mean by that is that there are lots of new technologies that are being developed that aren't necessarily going to help outcomes for patients.
Mm-hmm. То есть я бы подвел такой небольшой итог.
So my intermediate conclusion, so the myth can be based on both misconception of people by their own physiology and misconception of the possibilities of modern techniques, of modern equipment that can treat all kinds of cardiovascular diseases. Philip? Good morning, dear colleagues. So 2 previous speakers quite in detail talked about the situation in our country and the possible complications and diagnostics. And unfortunately for Russia, it's totally true, because if we look at some cardiovascular disease like cerebrovascular disease, like stroke, in our statistics it looks terrifying. And understanding that, like a cardiologist, that the reasons are two main reasons: hypertension and fibrillation of atriums. In terms of diagnostics of these two states in Russia, so it seems that it's not that hard, right, to diagnose. But the practice shows us that we are very bad at diagnosing both of these states. And it seems it should be easy, but if you look at defibrillators of atriums in Russia, about 3.5 million people with this issue, and what we can really diagnose amounts to 20–30% of this number. And as we all know, that fibrillation of atriums increase the risk of strokes 4–5 times, so it should be one of the cornerstone to reduce the risks of strokes. And we have wonderful preventive measures like anticoagulative therapy that helps to reduce stroke risks up to 70%. But first we should find these people to whom we should administer such products, such drugs. And here, two main trends go together. So we know how to do it, what to do it, how to detect, but and the spread among population is about 3.5%. So we have to find 3 people out of 100. For instance, here in this room we should find, I think it's around about 150 people. Here we should find, like, let's say 5–6 people. So we can put everyone through this regular checkup. We'll spend a lot of effort and money, and it will be quite hard, both methodologically and economically organized. Or we should find some ways, maybe using some new technologies, how to detect these people among this big amount of so the level of population. And so this population screening that can be organized in many countries, organized for different diseases, it's very hard both methodologically and ideologically implement. A bit later I'll show you our example. So it seems that another myth is that people think that we'll always be healthy. Of course, so we should run after them to show them that they need some intervention. Yeah, that's how it happens. Yes, Alexei? Good morning. I'd like to tell you several myths. First, it's a myth about there are two approaches to regular checkups. Like a Russian person doesn't go to doctors. He can be brought to a doctor, and usually people are proud that they never go to doctors. But all serious diseases, they don't have any symptoms, and especially of cardiovascular diseases, first and last symptom is sudden death, because cholesterol it's all right, so nothing hurts when there is high blood pressure, and all these plaques doesn't show themselves before they ruptured and blood is clotted. So the same attitude to the health is this. Another thing is like once per year a person comes and make cardiogram and thinks that in this cardiogram something's hidden, like it will save this person, like doctors will understand all that. Though this regular cardiogram, this ECG that's done once per year, this predictive value is very, very low. So 2 hours before a heart attack, you may get a totally normal ECG, and when you talk with your physician, who will ask about your heart risks, about your hereditary diseases, it will be more of value than make this ECG every year. It's the same about all these certificates that are asked before marathons. I don't understand what they try to understand. And another type of attitude towards your health, it's also either not right. It's when people that became successful and they start being very concerned about their health, and they start doing all kind of checkups, all kind of tests, oncomarkers, MRI of the whole body, trying to find all the diseases. But it turns out that you have to look for the diseases that influence, that impact your lifespan. And for instance, if a person makes MRI of the whole body, so the life of this person will be split before and after this MRI, because after detecting so many cysts in kidneys, hemangiomas in liver, and so on, so this person will just live and think, so what will happen? Though this person, it will not influence anything, because there are these myths that the cysts may become malignant. And I think that there are so many issues related to this medical knowledge, or sometimes too much knowledge. So we talk about biohacking of this super checkups, maybe a little bit too much, especially with these oncomarkers. Why people stop doing that? Because the sensitivity is very, very low. Cardiomarkers are quite simple. So it happens that we treat tests, not a person. So overall, I think it's clear now that myths and misconceptions may be of different nature and can really hurt, damage the patient, either delay this visit to a doctor or impede choosing the proper diagnostic procedure or treating procedure. But so who needs that? Irina, what are risk groups that you can mention? Main risk groups. I think here there are no myths. First of all, it's men. It's from what I already said. It's clear that if you are a man, your risk is several times higher than if you are a woman. It doesn't mean that if you make a procedure to change your sex, everything will change. No. So a man, it's always a risk. So age over 65 years old, it's also higher risk for both men and women. A high level of cholesterol, though it's not showing up, but it increases the risk of sudden death risk or some complications. Blood pressure. So if there is hypertension, so it increases 30% risk of cardiovascular disease. So there is special system score for people without cardiovascular diseases that assess your risks. Blood pressure, age, sex, and also smoking, and cholesterol level. So men, people who smoke, high blood pressure and high level of cholesterol, these are the main risks, and age. These are, I think, the major risks for this. Can we recommend this score for self-diagnosis? It's a good question. If it's a conscious, adequate person, yes, you can do this through all these tables to define what kind of risk you have. And then you can calculate if your score risk is over 10%, a very high risk. If it's from 5 to 9, it's high. Less than 1, it's a low risk. And moderate from 1 to 4. If it's very high or high, you should go to a doctor at once. Moderate and low, you can wait for it. If you don't, so depending on symptoms, if you don't have symptoms, you may not go to a doctor. But if you don't have symptoms, but you have high or very high risks, you should go to a doctor nevertheless. So we define this first level of tools. Score scale, you can find it in the internet, also in Russian, so there are nothing complicated. It's all quite easy, you can check it all by yourself. But then we have such a question. Marie, can we give this primary diagnostics to people themselves, so to potential patients?
So in November of 2019, there was a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, sponsored by Apple. And Apple enrolled 420,000 people to participate in an atrial fibrillation study. So this is a massive study. The results indicated that out of 420,000, there were only 2,000 patients that were identified as having some rhythm abnormality. Of those 2,000, only 1,000 actually followed up with a clinician to determine if they had a problem. Now, out of that 1,000 that did follow up, only 20 actually had urgent symptoms that would be associated with atrial fibrillation. 20 out of 420,000. So your question was, is it appropriate for people to do their own diagnosis using some technology? And what I would say is that following up is probably, one thing to me that really stands out, and that patients need to take control of their health and listen. So if you're participating in these studies, you should follow up. Additionally, and I'm going to make fun of myself here, if my son gets sick and he's got a high fever, I'll look it up on WebMD, and automatically he has typhoid fever or something. In the United States, that's less than 20,000 people have that, and so I have a tendency to overdiagnose. And so I think, so what I would say is that it's important to understand your risk. It's also important to rely upon your clinician. And using the Apple Watch, again, I'm just going to say right now, it's the Wild West when it comes to new technologies. There are lots of them out there, lots of wearable technologies, and you need to beware of the data that is being returned to you, and to not overreact. And I also agree with your comments about knowing your risk. There, as you mentioned, there are online calculators, and of everything that you can do, I would also say that you should watch your weight. So you mentioned high blood pressure. The Framingham study indicated that parental history, so family history of having cardiovascular disease, is the #1 link to developing cardiovascular disease yourself. So if your parents had some form of heart disease, pay attention to that. If your parents or grandparents had high blood pressure, even if you don't have it now, keep your eye on it. And then also if you have diabetes, you also are at higher risk as well.
Thanks. Итак, значит,
So it means that there are many gadgets that we can use. It could be smartwatch. It doesn't have to be Japanese smartwatch. Different fitness trackers. And I can just add one thing. They monitor some disorders in heart rate, some disturbances, but they will never show ischemia, myocardial ischemia, and atrial fibrillation that Philip mentioned. It's a very important thing, and you can check it. As to online calculators, yes, it's a good diagnostic tool. I can remind you that if you have family issues related to strokes or cardiovascular diseases, you belong to a risk group. Philip, so if somebody wants to go through the test, has seen some data on his watch. We have a cardio monitoring system. So how does it work? Could you explain? Before I get down to this issue, I'd love to get back to the previous question. I'm really grateful to Marie because she mentioned the research life about heart study. It's a very important research in cardiology that has been completed recently, and it was the first research carried out without any context between patients and doctors. It's only at the final stage that the patient contacted doctor. On the one hand, it's an advantage, but on the other hand, it's also a disadvantage. Because if we look at statistics of this research, so out of 420,000, only 781 people contacted doctors. And this means that only about 2% of patients that did it. And if we speak about similar research with participation of some medical personnel, doctors or nurses, so usually it's about 1% of people that go to the doctor for consultation. So these figures aren't big, but still the numbers are bigger. So this remoteness, you know, when there's no contact between doctors and patients, it could be an innovation which we are trying to achieve in digital medical care. But there must be a real doctor in this model, because the conversion will be less. So we have to find a good balance between these two things. So you probably saw a cardio chair at our stand, so you can get the cardiogram, and then it will be analyzed by our Sechenov University, and then you'll get the data with deciphering information, with the description that our specialists provide. So this is one of our technology that we implement together with several partners as part of monitoring and cardio screening. And if we take a look at the figures that we got here, you know, because I received statistics just for this period of assembly, 744 people were examined. And we identified 28 people with atrial fibrillation. I don't know whether it's a lot or not a lot. But speaking about the incidence of atrial fibrillation, usually it makes 3% depending on the age. So, and that's the meaning of it. Remote technologies, because we didn't have any doctors here at the venue, but we still could identify patients with a higher risk of stroke, for example. And we could give them recommendations, send them to doctors, or give other advice. If, for example, they already see the doctor at their outpatient clinic. So there is a very big field for work. In my previous statement, I mentioned that we can find 5 people in this audience, so how can we do it? So this is one of the technologies that can help us resolve this issue. Of course, there could be some limitations. One channel, 1 minute recording. So yes, there are certain restrictions, but it's better than nothing. So it's a practical technology, and we have seen it here. So it works very well, and it's good. So if you could tell us about atrial fibrillation. Why is it dangerous? So why is it good when you identify this atrial fibrillation? Well, why is it bad? It increases risk of a stroke by 6 times, and it increases the risk of cardioinsufficiency. So it's not just about heartbeat disruption. It has to be controlled and monitored. So, for example, we have to use anticoagulation therapy to control the risk. And there are some solutions to the problem. But it's very important to identify this. Many people are not aware that they have this atrial fibrillation because it doesn't demonstrate any symptoms. And we did some work in one of the districts in the Moscow region, in Mytishi region. And it's actually underway. You can check online. So we have 12 centers with portable cardiographs. So we examined about 4,000 people over 6 months. We identified about 120 people with atrial fibrillation, and we send them to cardiologists to double check and confirm these results for preventive measures. So this technology includes medical specialists. Of course, junior doctors cannot decipher the cardiogram and cannot give full description, but at least they can see the data, and so it's a combined pattern of work. It helps us to identify the patients and then prevent them from risk. So this diagnostics process seems to be very important. You can start with the internet checkups, go through some simplest tests or screening diagnostics, and then it can help to identify some dangerous pathologies. Another question for Alexei. So we are living in the city. We don't have time for doctors. There's never enough time to visit the doctor. So how can you develop a good checkup so that it would be sufficient? Well, I'll try to be brief. Actually, I criticized cardiogram, but in fact, it's worth doing at an early age. What age? At the age of 14 to for example, to check if you have some hereditary diseases. Otherwise, it'll be too late if you do it later. Then it would be good to get a heart ultrasound test. And also, it's good to find out your level of cholesterol. Because, it's not about hamburgers. It could be family cholesterol, especially if your father or mother or some other relatives died because of stroke when they were in their 50s or 60s. And also it's important to check your blood pressure. How often should you do it? Not 3 times per day, but maybe once a year. So it's important to check your blood pressure. But let me clarify this. Let's say we are 18-year-old. What should we do? You should check it at least once in the state of rest. Absolute rest is very important, without any emotional workload, without any pain, without overfilled bladder. So you check it, and then 6 months later or 1 year later you should check it again. and at the age of 30 or 40, you could have a broader examination, for example, diagnostics of neck vessels to check if there are any plaques. So it's very important to check biorhythmic blood test. Because there could be inflammation of the cell wall or intercell matrix, and this can lead to atherosclerosis. So it means that it's not a very long list of tests, and it's not very expensive. Exactly. So different tests, other tests are needed as recommended. For example, for a young girl, there's no need to check, for example, to get through a stress test. Yeah, I understand. For example, for athletes, it will be very important because they have to withstand a big strain. Yeah. And it's related to plaques and conductivity. Yeah. Okay. Let's say we collected some primary information. What should we do next? How useful is it? I know that Irina was one of the initiating people who came up with this early diagnostics. I wanted to dispel a myth. I'm a president of a Russian Society for Blood Hypertension, and we develop recommendations for diagnostics and treatment. If Ig is a risk factor, then yes, you can say that I participate in such into the development of such documents. But I wanted to add something to what the previous speaker said with regard to the frequency of blood pressure check. So according to our recommendations, which are in line with European recommendations, if the person has optimal blood pressure, 120/80, they can check their blood pressure 5 years later. So if it's 125 to 129 for systolic pressure, then twice a year. So these are Russian recommendations, but last year Japanese scientists published their recommendations, and they recommend to check blood pressure once a year at least, even for people with normal blood pressure. If there are some issues, then every 6 months. So if there are high risk factors, the people should go and visit the doctors. What kind of doctors? There is a department of medical prevention. So if you don't like something, you should go to those departments. And if you have some pathologies, then you can see a cardiologist or therapist. So self-diagnostics, remote technologies, does it affect mortality rate and the incidence of diseases? Well, we haven't conducted any studies in our country. I mentioned Finland, and Finland introduced a national program of preventive, it was a preventive program. So Finland was very close to us in terms of mortality rates and risk factors, but it has achieved tremendous success. So if we take Finland's experience, then I can say that early diagnostics and prevention is really important. Okay, Marie, now let's get down to the device that your company developed. So it helps to do the diagnostics of coronary arteries, right?
I keep forgetting to turn my microphone on. So Cadence is meant to be a tool not just for ruling out obstructive coronary disease, but we are meant as a first line for clinicians to assess your heart valves. We're meant to assess a variety of different chest pains so we can provide information about pericarditis. We also are excellent for detecting and assessing congestive heart failure. And then a couple of interesting things that we can pick out include mitral valve prolapse and then bicuspid aortic valves. And so some of these are really difficult for clinicians to assess in a primary care setting. The people on the stage obviously have tools and equipment to be able to assess these conditions. We're probably most famous for our coronary artery disease abilities. Now, the thing that we have been challenged with is that the guideline committees keep changing what constitutes ischemia. So in the beginning, when we first started to develop our coronary product, the guideline committee said if a person has greater than 70% stenosis, and I'll pause for that so everyone can sort of think about what that means, 70% stenosis in your vessels would call for some form of intervention, and so that would include a stent or a bypass operation. Now, clinicians are directed to use something called fractional flow reserve, and that just means that they're taking pressure differential measurements before a stenosis and then after a stenosis, trying to determine if there are flow-limited lesions. And then at that point, they would do an intervention. And so it's not just 70%, it can be a continuum. And so what our device does now is rules out obstructive coronary disease. And so what that means is if you have chest pain and you have intermediate risk, like the doctor mentioned before, then cadence would be used to tell you that you're okay or that you don't need to have an immediate intervention, and doctor can send you home early from an emergency department. Now, the cadence device, obviously, I think is very special. It's a handheld device, and we call it, let me see if we can go to the next. We call it the Iron Man because it looks like Iron Man's core reactor. It's comprised of acoustic and ECG technology. It takes about 2 minutes to conduct this test. It can be conducted anywhere. There's a quiet room. A patient lays on their back, and data is collected at 4 separate sites on the thorax. The data is then sent to a tablet. The tablet acts as a data portal, and it's enabled with cellular technology and Wi-Fi, and so that means that it can be conducted almost anywhere. I took a look at the coverage map, cell phone coverage map for Russia, and there are places in Siberia where cadence can be used. Far eastern part is not so much. But then we have artificial intelligence on a cloud-based server that allows us to assess your data and then send a report anywhere in the world where a clinician has access to an email. And so it's enabled for telemedicine. A minimally trained person can conduct this test. So if you've never done an ECG, it's not going to take you long to learn how to do an ECG, and also collecting this acoustic information. And so it's also extremely inexpensive, and we in our company, we're very cognizant of patient populations that are disparate in terms of socioeconomic access to healthcare. They say that 70% of outcomes can be influenced by interpersonal violence. So if you're living in a home where there's violence, if you don't have housing, if you don't have access to transportation, all of these things will influence your outcome. And so we, for Cadence, try to bring that closer to home and closer to the community level. But it's an exciting device, and hope that someday you'll all be tested by it.
Thanks. То есть это пока что...
So for now, just one channel device. So what do we have in Russia, Philip? What are we developing here? In Russia we're developing quite a lot of interesting things. And a small comment about one channel ECG. There is always some skepsis related to it, but as for atrial fibrillation that I've been talking about, so in September our American colleagues made a statement that one channel ECG can be accepted as confirmation of atrial fibrillation. So at least here there are some movements talking about coronary heart disease diagnosis as for one channel ECG. I think there are some moments, and we are all used that it should be 12 channel cardiogram where we can see all the changes. So in this term it seems that still stays, but I think so in the world there are some publications and some work and quite significant studies that show that one channel ECG can give us much more data than we expect. For instance, diastolic dysfunction diagnosis as the initial stage of heart failure. So not through visual analysis of ECG, but so it's some kind of spectral analysis when a machine assesses it and gives you the result. There are some approaches to coronary heart disease diagnosed in the same way, but for now it's at the level of development, I think. So there are approaches to analyze both cardiogram and there are some developments in Russia and in our institute about combined analysis of ECG and pulsed wave. So when we diagnose rhythm aberration and assess of blood pressure without contact, so without the special device put on hand. So it's interesting, and I think it's promising, because when we're talking about measuring blood pressure, so you put this thing on your head, this and then you press this device, and then we see some numbers. So we can't completely change the paradigm that from this pulse wave we can measure the blood pressure. For now it's hard to imagine even for a doctor, but such works being held, and it's quite possible that it may be real. Now there is an algorithm that requires some individual adjustments. So first you have to calibrate this algorithm, then it will work, and then each year this algorithm will become better and better. So before you need just 50 measurements, now 10 measurements. So what will happen next? So then you just put your finger at the camera of your phone and it measures your blood pressure. There was such an experience already 5-6 years ago. It was a very well spread, especially in the US, app that tried to measure your blood pressure through this pulse wave and camera. It was a big scandal because it didn't measure it right, and what's worse, it decreased the pressure, and especially it was for hypertensive people with hyperpressure. So it was a big scandal, and now it's a new generation of these algorithms. So everything that we can imagine now from all these different devices for health, they are in this or that way. It's all about smartphones, because it's a device that you always have with you. It's in your pocket, it's always on. So everything that will be developed in the future will be somehow either connected or built in your phone, or using some capabilities of your smartphones. So, for instance, odometer, we are almost all using it, that can assess your physical activity, that measure your steps, and can offer you some preventive measures. So I think many people use it. The question is that this program, they are certified by doctors, or it's just some thing that was created by person and wasn't registered. So this cardiogram in the phone, it's not surprising. So you can even assess your eye fundus through your phone. You can connect ultrasound device to your phone. And ECG devices, like sensors that are just connected to the phone, and you can make ECG even using your phone. So the future is here. Yes, so this, yes, that's what already happening right now. So when devices are already all connected, paired with your phone in your pocket. Alexei, is that what a citizen expects from a modern medicine, or does he need anything else? I think we can imagine the very best system of regular checkups, create global system of checkups, but there will always be a human factor with all these myths that are around health. And so what we are trying to do here is this medical, to raise medical awareness. And Irina said that this program of Northern Karelia, where she worked, so doctors moved around and explained what you should do, what you should eat, and they had great success because it was this medical awareness program. Because whatever we do right now, so for our patients, we can diagnose like a lot of things. But if our patients say, but statins, they are destroying liver, and liver is like the most important organ for erection. It influences your potence, and so patient compliance. It's a very big issue. It's a global issue. I'd rather take some additives, some supplements, like omega-3. So while we haven't, unless we solve this issue, it will always be like that. So even best achievements in medicine, they will stay and wait, and they will not be used until we explain to people that it's necessary, that you should want to use them, and you should really hear it from every corner. Like now everyone's talking about this interval fasting. And so wrapping it a bit up. So Irina, what can we do? Some practical advice. So for instance, if you are in a high risk group, I hope that I will not be there. It's not about you, but just if unfortunately some of us here is in a high risk group, or very high, as I said, the first thing is you should go to some preventive centers, to health centers, to be examined, and if necessary, referred to this or that doctor. Another question, is it free of charge, or is it you should pay for it? It's free of charge. In 2015, they developed a program, preventive program, and now preventive measures are within this mandatory health insurance. And according to Russian legislation, from 18 to 39 years old, these regular checkups related to work, so you can have them once every 3 years, and after 40 years, every year, for free. And once a year, you can have a preventive checkup. So it's a very, very easy and fast exam, including surveys, not only about your cardiovascular system, but also about, so to indirectly understand some issues related to oncology and some other non-infectious diseases. And this preventive checkup includes also blood pressure check, cholesterol level check and glucose level check. We haven't talked a lot of diabetes. Marie mentioned this as a very important factor. So all these very easy tests that can help us detect risk groups, they are free of charge every year. So you can have them if you have this health mandatory insurance. Marie, what are the achievements of last year allow us to decrease mortality rate from cardiovascular diseases? So what would you recommend to listen to, what to use?
The first half of it.
Значит,
So once again, so what achievements of recent years allow us to reduce the mortality risks from cardiovascular diseases? What would you like to look at? What kind of tests, methodologies, techniques?
I would repeat what the doctor to my right said, and that is you need to know your risk score. On the internet, you can access the risk score through, the name of it is ASCVD, know your risk. So I'm going to say a few obvious things. First, if you smoke, stop smoking. Okay?
это важно.
Second, watch your diet. And so full grains and watching meat consumption. I also like this idea of intermittent fasting. I might look that up and try to do that myself. I would also say that taking your medication is a really big deal. So taking the blood pressure medication and also controlling your cholesterol level. And then the other tests that I think are important include really making sure that your weight is under control. You know what your BMI numbers are, and so that's how much you weigh in comparison to how tall you are, and so you should do those calculations. And I think you should see your doctor. And this should be a collaborative process. You should not be on your own as you are trying to make assessments of your health, because again, using WebMD to understand your symptoms and also your disease states is just not a good idea. And I think the most innovative devices on the market are actually not devices, rather methodologies and algorithms that are being used by clinicians to work alongside patients to make informed decisions about your health.
Thanks.
And I'd like to underscore that Marie were very right to show that this diagnostic and treatment process is two-way side. So not only a doctor treats you, but a patient is also treats him or herself. So efforts should be from both sides, from doctors and from patients. So it's a mandatory condition. So Philip, can you add anything? Of course. I agree totally with what my colleagues just said. It was very comprehensive and very nice about preventive measures. So you asked about some practical steps. So dear colleagues, so who made a cardiogram in our chair here in the exhibition? Not all. Yes, and I think the very first practical step is to make this one-channel ECG at our device, receive at your phone the conclusion, and at least you'll see how it works, that it's already present, that's today. And on the other hand, you can, this ECG, to check all this rhythm aberration, you can make it once a year. Alexei, what do you think? I think colleagues mentioned everything. I'd like to repeat that. So not to smoke, walk everywhere, eat vegetables, do your regular checkups, not because you have some symptoms, but because it's important. Watch right bloggers and read some authors and go to right resources. I think this is it. Yeah, I think it seems that today's medicine can help us prevent not only some heavy, great severe complications like heart attack and stroke, but it may help us maintain our health, our heart health, to keep us healthy and to keep us active.
So the most important thing is to start it early, taking the reliable information into account instead of trusting some fake information, because you know there are so many dishonest people that try to sell some products, advertising them that they will give you all the information about your heart, but it's not true. There is no, you know, tricorder that they had in Star Trek. So we are using different diagnostic tools, different diagnostic methodologies based on scientific studies, and you can always get in touch with specialists in order to get all the information required. It's true, we can check our health, check our heart, and enjoy life. I left some time for Q&A because I guess there'll be questions from the audience. Please introduce yourself and just one question. I understand that you might have a few, but please stick to just one. And you can either address your question to some speaker or you ask your question to all speakers. Let's start with this side. Hello, thank you very much. It was great. You really helped us. So, I have this question. What do you think about the effect of alcohol on hearts and vessels? You know, it sounds really great to have 200 grams or 300 grams of good wine during dinner, maybe Spanish or Italian wine, some other kind of wine. And I can share my own experience. I sometimes try to make myself drink a glass of wine. Do I really need it? You know, sometimes it's better just to have a glass of water. We got you. So maybe you could recommend me something else. Whiskey. I can answer this. Many people refer to academician Chazov, who used to say you can have whiskey, 100 grams is okay. And some people asked me, is it true that your father has alcohol every day? And is it true that that's the reason that he lived up to the age of 90 and he is the president of our cardio center? If you don't want to drink, don't. Please don't. If you want to drink and if you know that you won't be able to control yourself and stick to just one glass of wine, don't do it. Should we prohibit alcohol at all? No. Moderate consumption is possible. You know, because if we try to prohibit something, many people would be happy to break this rule. What about smoking? Yeah, smoking is evil, but Nobody has studied the effect of a small amount of smoking. For example, let's say if a person just has one cigarette a day, there hasn't been any research, and then nobody has studied when people quit smoking suddenly, and this gives them a lot of stress. You know, we are just trying to answer questions. But I think it's scandalous, this information that you give us. Well, it's just the discussion. There is no research that says that small doses of alcohol harm your health. Yes, a lot of consumption of alcohol would be extremely harmful, but if you just have a little bit, then... but of course, if you are going to have 7 glasses of wine, this would be too much. Marie?
We do have an alternative, grape juice. So it's less exciting, but it has the same chemical that wine has.
Да, это правда.
Yeah, that's true. But I guess it all depends on the people. Yeah, the substances are the same, but you know, people have wine because of ethanol, and juice doesn't have it. Other question? What pharmaceuticals are most effective, especially those that are going through the 3rd stage? Maybe myocardium company or inhibitors for PCSK9. So what are the drugs? You mean cardio drugs? Yes, cardiovascular drugs. Anybody knows? Who wants to answer? I think that there's a new class of drugs based on RNA interference, and I think that they are very good. They are very impressive, and many cardiologists agree with that. So if we have an opportunity to reduce the level of cholesterol with just 2 injections in a year, it would be fantastic. The cost of this medicine is not very high, so RNA sequence is not very expensive in production. So we are sometimes taking statins that arise a lot of questions related to safety. So, you know, if there are just 2 injections per year, and it can change the approach to cholesterol level reduction, I guess this is number 1. I'm not sure whether it happens, but I think they have very good potential. We had some questions in the central part. Hello, my name is Konstantin Ivanov. I'm a journalist and cardiologist. Thank you very much. First of all, it's been very interesting. So, your heart is in your hands. That's the title of the discussion. In the 70s, many institutions were dealing with this issue, and one-channel monitoring is good for atrial fibrillation. It's great. And I remember that we also studied heart rate variations and different predictors, but it didn't bring anything. Some companies are trying to make money on this, and I'm worrying about this. And since you we're talking about pharmacological products, what do you think about CTG2? This was a prerogative of endocrinologists, but now this is used by cardio specialists as well. My question is for Philip, because there's a new US program to identify heart insufficiency. So, Philip, would you like to answer? I just wanted to emphasize the fact that, we don't have specialists in this room, and that's why most of people didn't understand your question. Well, let's split your question into several parts. As to heart rate variation and variability and its use in different systems. It's true, it arises a lot of questions, and there's no clear understanding as to how it could be used for discrete monitoring. As to long-term monitoring, we don't have enough experience. Daily monitoring or 3-day monitoring. It would be good to have 1 month monitoring or 3 months monitoring of continuous cardiogram. Then this could be used. So once we have this experience, once we have this long-term monitoring that would work 24 hours, 7 days a week, so maybe this would be the time when we can discuss whether it could be used for forecasting. At the moment, we don't have enough data to use it. As to daily use, yes, yeah. Now, speaking about new breakthroughs in diabetes treatment and the fact that this could be used for cardio diseases. So endocrinologists admitted that they did wrong treatment for diabetes, because many patients die not because of diabetes but because of complications, either kidney complications or cardiovascular complications. And when this group of pharmaceuticals appeared that reduces mortality rate, of course it's a breakthrough, and we are no longer sure whether these medicines should be used by cardiologists or endocrinologists. I'm sure that cardiologists will be using these drugs soon. And now as to voice recognition. This is one of the technologies that has been developing rapidly. There are machines that can interpret voice based on AI. There are several developments on this in the world. And as to heart insufficiency, you can give a diagnosis based on a call. So yeah, these tools are developing rapidly, and I guess call centers could do this voice analysis, and it's not that difficult to do, technically speaking. Thank you. There's a question here. Just a second. We'll pass a mic for you. You are speaking about future, but I'd love to speak about today. I have had this problem for many years, a big gap between top and bottom figures of my blood pressure. So I have had this problem for a long time. So what can you say? It's an individual case. Which specialist should this lady go to? Cardiologist? you know, this is one of the rare forms of hypertension. Hypertension in a lying position. Many people, many elderly people have this problem who have static hypotension, so that's why they need special approach to diagnostics and treatment. So you have to look for your doctor that can help you. But it's an individual case. You have to find a specialist. Can you take a microphone? I came to a cardiologist by chance. So we did different tests, and they said that my heart beat rate was very high, and it turned out to be 90 or 100. And then the doctor suggested taking some pills. You know, I'm trying to walk, I'm trying to do some exercises. Maybe the doctor, the cardiologist, I mean, could give me more recommendations, just apart from taking pills. I understand that they don't have a lot of time for the appointments, but I'd rather do something else instead of taking pills. And the second question, of course, if you drown, you are ready to do anything. And I'm trying to read more and more things. I have attended many lectures here, so I was reading some articles on the internet, and many people ask the same question. So there are excellent medicines that are offered on the internet. You know, you can take this pill and you'll feel fine. And so if the government allows this information, maybe this should be checked. And they have certificates. There is a metrology certificate. I'm sorry, we are running out of time. I understand that cardiologists should have given some recommendation for physical activity and other things. So maybe you should go to see a different doctor. I'm sure Alexei would do something like that. So you can come and ask Alexei later. And it's true that the regulators are trying to do something, but there is a lot of false information on the internet, so you have to be skeptical. You know, there are so many advertisements, please take a loan, but it's not true, or some magical pill, but they don't work. Well, let me thank all the speakers. We have to stop, we have to finish, and thank you very much.